It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, April Wright. Hi, April. How are you?
Hello. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to have you here. I watched your movie. I watched the documentary. And, you know, I was really surprised that there were that many drive-in movies still operating in the United States. I thought they were all gone by now. Do you know how...
Well, going into the pandemic, there were 305, and since the pandemic, the number has actually gone down a little bit. So it's under 300. Not sure exactly how far under until they all open for the season this year.
Well, prior to the pandemic, though, they must have been hurting, yeah? Or is there still a vibrant business for it? I know with the pandemic it made sense because everybody's isolated in their car and there's no big deal about contagion or... what do they call that? Social distancing, right?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, I actually made a previous documentary on the topic, and I looked at the history of drive-ins, and I was surprised. That one came out 10 years ago, so I was shooting it about 15 years ago. And I thought the same thing, but I was surprised to learn that starting in the late 90s and through the 2000s, there were actually a lot of brand new drive-ins that opened, and also a bunch of ones that have been closed for decades that were reopened. So there's kind of been a mini resurgence underway with new drive-ins and reopening drive-ins, but at the same time, the total number has slowly been going down because more have been closing. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. They're still staying afloat somehow.
Well, I wonder if it's just the nostalgic value. Because, I mean, for the practical value of watching a film, I mean, do they get the first-run films there?
Yes, practically every drive-in has been playing. Someone was surprised when I told them that yesterday. They've all been playing first-run films for the last, probably 30 or 40 years. They were only really playing B movies kind of into the 80s when there was a shortage of film prints going around. To the multiplexes, but for years they've been first run, and they they do pretty good. I forget the beginning part of your question.
No, I just was saying that is the resurgence largely due to sort of the nostalgic value? Because
the nostalgic value, yes. Well, they say no, because they say if it's for nostalgia that people go and they check it off their bucket list and they're like, okay, I did that. I went to the drive-in. But most of them do regular business in their local communities. So if they, have stuck around this long, it's not because of nostalgia. It's because their local communities support them and go to them to see first-run movies.
Well, I remember drive-ins when I was a teenager, but, we never went to see the film per se. It was always to, sit in the car and do something we weren't supposed to be doing, basically.
Yeah,
and the
makeout scene
in
certain years. Yeah, for sure. It used to be that. When drive-ins first had their heyday, it was really, the first one, actually this year is the 90th anniversary of the invention of the drive-in and the first one opening. But before World War II, there were only about 100 in the country. After World War II, it went from 100 to 1,000 to 5,000. And a lot of that was just fueled by the baby boom, in addition to, suburban growth that was happening at that time. And then those kids in the baby boom that went to them as kids kept going as teenagers and went to the drive-in on their dates. Because by the time they were older, there was television. And so the parents were staying home to watch television, and the drive-in became the kids' hangout place. But now it's come full circle. It's back to families, kind of like we're going after the baby boom. That is the primary audience for drive-ins now.
Well, in the film, it looked like a very much sort of a social gathering. I mean, people would just come and I don't know, it sort of reminded me of a big camp out where everybody would come and watch movies and, hang out in their cars. And
that's totally what it is. And some people say it's a little bit like tailgating for a game or something where, people will turn their trucks around, pull out lawn chairs. There's definitely a social aspect. And drive-ins were always community gathering places, and that is also part of what keeps them alive. They're about way more than the movie. They're definitely a whole experience, and you do mingle with other people if you want to.
Well, the operating costs for the owners must be tremendous on those things.
We show a little bit of that in the new documentary. They have to upkeep the physical land. Sometimes that requires a lot of mowing and a lot of maintenance. The film prints they get from the studios, they make a little share of that. A lot of that goes back to the studios. But it's really the concessions is the primary income source. It usually brings in a little bit more than the ticket sales.
Well, an average drive-in employs about how many people? 10?
That's a good question. It really depends. I mean, I tried to show the variety in my film, that some of them, have up to 7 screens. So some are single screens, but many are multiplexes. So in that case, they do need more people working there. I mean, a few I showed in my film, it's just husband and wife, and they do most of it together. But others have, a whole bunch of employees. When I got the list of employees, to show in the end credits of my film, some of them had 25, 30 employees.
Are most of them family run? I mean, in your film, it seemed like a lot of them were family run. Yeah.
Yeah, I think some film companies were involved in them years ago, but most of that has faded away. There are a few corporations that have drive-ins, but those are still family run private corporations that have more than one location. So yeah, I would say on the whole, there might be a few outliers, but on the whole, they're family owned and operated. So they're small businesses. They're small family run businesses, basically.
Out of the ones that you did, you featured 11, I think, 10 or 11 drive-ins?
Yes, I ended up going to 11 in 8 different states.
Okay. Out of those 11, are they all still running?
One actually closed about a month ago, the Mission Tiki that was in the Los Angeles area.
Okay.
At the time when I was filming, they had actually already been sold, but the developer delayed developing the property, and then COVID happened, so they kind of had a little stay of execution. But they did finally close for good a few weeks ago, which is pretty sad. A lot of people in LA are sad because a lot of people discovered that drive-in during the pandemic when it was one of the few places to go.
Were you a drive-in fan? Is that why you did this?
I did, yeah. I went to them growing up. My mom took us, in the backseat of the car, of course, and there were 3 in the area that I grew up north of Chicago that we went to really often every summer. And I continued going to them, as a teenager in high school. And then once I got into college and beyond, I noticed that there were fewer and fewer of them left. And I noticed a lot that were just sitting vacant and in bad condition. And I really wanted to know how that could have happened. Why wouldn't they still be open? And that's what inspired me to make my first drive-in documentary. Was I wanted to find out what happened.
I can remember the drive-in that I used to go to when I was in high school, and this would have been in the mid-'70s, late 70s. The sound quality was awful. Has technology improved that? Because they had those little tin speakers that you'd hang on your window, and the sound was it was horrible.
Yeah, it's so funny how many people think they still have those, and a few keep them around for the nostalgic purpose, like you were mentioning. So one of the drive-ins in the film, the Wellfleet on Cape Cod, they try to offer a very authentic experience, and so they keep their speakers maintained. So that's a place where you can still find them. But the technology of the industry changed in the early 80s. It switched over to radio sound, which initially was over AM radio. Now it's over FM. And so your sound is as good as your car's system. And actually the audio is quite good when you get into a drive-in and you have, 100 cars or more all playing the same soundtrack of the movie. You actually get, a theatrical experience where you can hear it everywhere.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Do most people, and this is a stupid question, but there's a reason for it. When people go to the drive-ins, do you typically have all your windows down in the car?
That is not a stupid question. It varies. When you were probably going, most people stayed inside the car. And one of the changes in the last few decades is a lot of people bring lawn chairs and sit outside of the car. And a lot of people have pickup trucks or SUVs, so they pull them in backwards and they put blow-up mattresses sometimes, or, just set up a whole little house for themselves in the back of the SUV or in the pickup truck. So there's a lot of people doing that. Some people still stay inside the car, and I guess it just depends more on weather and mosquitoes or whatever if you want to have the windows up. But generally, a lot more people sit outside the car now.
All right, well, that is interesting, yeah, because I don't think anybody sat outside the car. In fact,
I remember sometimes sitting on the hood of the car or lying on the hood of the car at the drive-in a couple times. We did that when friends had trucks and things. But yeah, mostly in the old days, you'd stay in the car.
The funny thing about the drive-in that I went to is that it kept going until the early 80s, I think, and it shut down. The way it was situated, it was right off the freeway, and the screen sort of faced the freeway. So as you were driving, if you were going in the right direction, you could see the screen for, 5-6 seconds while you were driving by. They had so many accidents in that one spot because people would get distracted.
Oh, that's so funny. I think that was one of the funnest part of drive-ins as a kid, is if you drove by and you could see that screen, you always thought you were missing out on something. You always wanted to go to that drive-in. So, yeah, I always used to like that.
So the film came out we should mention the title, I suppose. Going Attractions, the definitive story of the American drive-in movie. That was my original one. Oh, that was the original one.
10 years ago.
Okay.
Yep, that's the original one that came out a decade ago, and that is the whole history of the drive-in. If you want to know what happened and how they came to be in the heyday, and that one is actually having its 10-year anniversary, and then the new one is called Back to the Drive-In.
Okay.
Because I went back to the drive-in, and during pandemic, a lot of people went back to the drive-in to rediscover it. And that one is out today on VOD, so you can get it on Apple TV and Amazon and Spectrum Cable and all over the place, anywhere you can rent or buy a new movie.
Well, tell me about the first one. Is it similar in style? Because I saw the second one.
The first one is about the history, so it's completely different. It talks about the invention through some of the things we were talking about, how they became popular after World War II, the baby boom, and then all of the factors that started chipping away to lead to the demise of the drive-in. So it's full history. And then this brand new one it's very present day. I visited drive-ins when they were just kind of in the second year of the pandemic and showed the family-owned operations, pulled back the curtain, and spent time at a bunch of drive-ins to see what they're really doing to try to keep these places alive.
All right, great. And you said that the second one, Back to the Drive-In, that releases today?
Yep. And that one, it's shot in 4K. It has a bunch of drone photography so you can see what the drive-ins look like. And it's just really about the people and the families, and it's about their resilience to try to They feel like these places are really important to their communities and to the families and children that are there. So they are going through a lot of struggles right now. If you have a drive-in near you, you should, look and see if any are close by. Go check them out. Try to support them because they're definitely struggling, but they're very much determined to keep them going for future generations.
Is the entrance fee cheaper generally than the multiplex, or about the same?
What I noticed being on the road, I think generally it's a little bit cheaper. And usually they have tiered pricing for kids. So sometimes kids under a certain age are free or they're a reduced ticket. And a lot of drive-ins play double features. So that makes a difference that you're seeing two movies for the price of one. So I would say in general, I think they are a little less than the indoors for the value.
Well, April, we got to wind this down. Thanks so much for coming on. I did enjoy your film. It took me back to the one by the freeway that everybody crashed when they were looking at. It brought back some interesting memories. Thank you so much for coming on. Again, the new one is called Back to the Drive-In. My guest is April Wright. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Goingattractions.com. You can find more information on there.
Okay. All right, great. Well, best of luck with the launch, and I hope it does well.
I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.